Nice to be seen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Likewise. My colleagues were rooting against me showing up tonight.
I know they were.
Yes.
I thought one of them was going to meet you in the lobby downstairs.
Lock him in the car.
Well,
Yeah.
Councilor Bounds will be happy that you're here. I told him I would get him out of his sick bed if we needed that extra
Yeah.
council for a forum.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
You're kind of lonely over on this side of the table.
Yeah, I was wondering if it was the deodorant failed or something. Both of us are.
My brother.
Say
A
it.
personal hygiene issue or what?
Yeah.
One more minute, folks.
15 days. Yeah. Interesting place, I understand. No. Yeah.
Ready to go?
Yep.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The hour is 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order the meeting of the Laconia City Council scheduled for September 10th, 2018 at this hour. As always, we'll begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our American flag. I would ask that you please rise and join Councilor Mark Hayes in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the record, we'll note that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by the city clerk, Cheryl Hebert, and I would ask that she please call the roll.
Counselor Cheney,
Here?
Counselor Bounds,
Councilor Bounds is not here this evening.
Counselor Littman,
Councilor Littman is not here this evening.
Counselor Haynes.
Here.
Counselor Hamel.
Here.
Counselor Hosmer.
Here.
Mayor Engler.
Somebody has to be present,
Oh,
so I'll be present.
Keep Brenda happy.
And I will note for the record that 4 councilors are either here or present at tonight's meeting, and the quorum has been established. Also note for the record that the council is joined at the front table tonight by City Manager Scott Myers. Before we get into the agenda, I would like to make note of one agenda change that will be of interest to our audience as well, I believe, and that is, with the indulgence of the council, I should say, I would like to move the item 18, citizens' request to comment on current agenda items, to following item 19, the city manager's report. I understand we have a number of people tonight who are interested in item 19B, which is a discussion of short-term rentals with our planning director. And so I think they will want to hear what he has to say before offering comment themselves. So with the indulgence of the city council, I would like to move item 18 down following 19B. I'll do that right before we get to new business. Okay? All right, our first order of business tonight then is minutes. And we have before you tonight the minutes from our last meeting, which was August 27th. Those minutes were distributed to the council on August 29th. No corrections or changes were submitted to the clerk, and so unless there are any at this hour, I'm going to declare that the minutes to our August 27 meeting are accepted as submitted by the city clerk. We have no consent and action items tonight, so we'll move right to citizen comments for matters not on the agenda. Is there anyone in our audience tonight? Give me a second. This is the part of our agenda when we take comment from people in the public who want to speak to the council about a matter that is not on tonight's agenda. Not on tonight's agenda. And Mr. Tardif, I think, if I'm looking, my tired old eyes are not deceiving me. Welcome, sir.
Good evening. Glad to be here. Item not on the agenda is Elm Street School.
Can you use the mic, please?
Excuse me. Elm Street School's pickup at 3 o'clock is out of hand. I am a committee of 3. That's the crossing guard, the police officer, and myself, who has the pleasure of picking up great-grandchildren. And the problem is that the traffic is backed up all the way to Parade Road lights, and as I'm told and having witnessed, all the way back to Lakeport Square. And so the committee, so-called, has observed that it needs more holding spaces, and currently they are parking on the side of the road, which impedes two-way traffic, if you haven't noticed. And so the recommendation is that the green space between the curbing and the sidewalk be removed to allow for holding more cars. Currently, a certain amount of cars have already taken the land prior to that as a holding lane. And if I may, I'd like to hand the...
So you're talking about eliminating sublawns.
Correct.
In what area?
I'll pass this out.
All right. So when you say to Parade Road, traffic is backed up going north all the way from Elm Street School past the country club to Parade Road.
Yeah.
Waiting to pick kids up after school.
Correct. They're called walkers, but they just don't ride the bus, and they don't walk anyplace. They get picked up by the parents, friends, relatives. And as you can see, I've taken a whiteout and shown where the traffic pattern would gain parking spaces. Make the turn tie into the usual area where they do have a holding pattern.
So this is similar to what happens at Woodland Heights.
Woodland Heights was, I mean, in the past, Woodland Heights was taken care of by adding additional turn lanes, and they no longer are backed up into the end of,
So right now, nobody queues up in the parking lot?
in the parking lot. The midline, that's what they're doing now. They come off the street, make the right-hand turn, and then they're in the parking lot. And with this plan, they would turn off the street.
So is this what's happening now, or what you want to happen?
No. Well, I should have kept one for myself, so you'd watch my finger, but between the street, which is the longest line, the street, which is the longest
Show us
line,
on that.
here's the school, and here's the street. It's the space between the street curbing is now the holding lane all the way back to off the picture. And it was like that last year, but there are apparently more walkers. And the police have had to have a dispatch on the last 2 occasions that I was there. And I don't believe they've cited anybody, but they've stopped them parking by the house on the same side of the street. And they're no longer allowed to stand along the curb, waiting their turn to turn into the parking lot. The other, what I'll call the west entrance of the parking lot, is the bus entrance. There's also parking for 2 cars for visitors. And everyone else is in the street. They're all parked in here, which is in the street, and then they make a turn. So by eliminating the grass area, the green space, there are 2 trees in that green space that would have to be removed, which is
So you're talking
unfortunate.
strictly about the green space in front of the school,
Between the street and the school parking lot,
the sub-lawn.
so
Yeah.
in between that, there's the sidewalk that the kids walk.
But that doesn't solve the problem all the way back to Parade Road, right?
It'll help immensely. If there's
So
room
where
for
are
those
those cars parked?
currently in the
In
street.
the street itself?
Right, so the number of cars that are doing that would be transposed into the green space. The sidewalk for the children and the additional green space towards the school are still intact. It's a matter that is a concern, I believe, for the police department, because they have to enforce the law. That's how long you can stand in one place and block traffic down to one way. It's a matter, I guess, I thought it was going to be a matter with the school board, but it's not. That's city land from the sidewalk up.
Have you been to the school board? Or the
No,
administration?
I was told by the police officer that if changes were to be made, they had to be presented to the council. So I bit the bullet and come to present it to the council. I worked for Woodland Heights several years ago. If you're going to send it to, I don't think it belongs in committee. I think the public works director should go review with a police officer, because the officer told me that the same situation is happening on Pleasant Street now.
Yeah, it is.
And even worse, because they're paving the road or rebuilding the road. This repair is not caused by any peripheral stuff. It's just more walkers who are really getting picked up by someone.
Councilor Hamel has a question.
Yeah, I agree with Tom on this, because I've been stuck there before. And I've never seen it down to the lights, though. I mean, the furthest I've seen it is that road that goes down the hill.
By the golf course.
Yeah, I've seen it back there. And you're right, they park in the lane. So you have to take a chance and go around and hope another car isn't coming, because there is no room. So I agree with you there 100%. And Pleasant Street the same way. I've got friends over there that they can't even get out of their street because the cars block their street sometimes. So, yeah. But I mean, if you take the green area, Tom, aren't you just moving the car from here to here? But the same number of cars are you can't add cars.
Your observation is correct. But the difference is it won't be the same cars that are blocking the street.
Correct. They won't be blocking the street, they'll be
You
over.
think there's enough, depending on how the design comes out, they could go beyond school property back towards the golf course and make anything that gains you more folding lane has got to help. It has to help.
This is Ward 6, I presume? Councilor's avoiding eye contact.
I wonder if there's room to make them go behind the building of the school, they come back around.
The last time I was behind there, the playground is there, the football field is there, there's a lot of activity.
I know
They
the
got to find a way to
playground's
come
back.
around.
It's a walkway ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a street, it doesn't look like a street.
So, Councilor, you want to take the lead in seeing that the DPW director and the police take a look?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and thanks, Mr. Tarter, for bringing it to our attention, because I think there are a couple of concerns there. you're opening up the thoroughfare there, so the cars can't get by. You're not exactly alleviating the backup all the way down to the intersections. I see there's a sidewalk there as well, so naturally we'd have to plan for snow removal, not have it plowed and just dumped onto the sidewalk, which I don't think DPW would do, but we certainly have to have a plan for that as well. So I'd make a motion that Department of Public Works studies this and gets back to us with a report. One, verifying the nature and the degree of the backup, maybe conferring with the police department about the safety of the area, and then giving us a report at some point so we can consider it and see which way to alleviate this condition.
All right, we have a motion on the floor made by Councilman Ward.
Just, would you add Pleasant Street in? We might as well take care of both.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I think that's a good idea.
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councilor Hamel. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else have a comment tonight on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda? No? No interviews, no nominations, no public hearings. We're already down to mayor's report, and I'll make it brief. I just wanted to remind everyone that State of New Hampshire primary day is tomorrow, and the polls in all 6 wards in Laconia open at 7 a.m. if I remember correctly,
Yep.
and close at 7 p.m.
Correct.
So all 6 wards open all day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And on the ballot are all state, county, and school board races. The state and county races, I believe, are all on the same ballot, from governor down through Congress in both parties, down through your local state representatives, through all of your county officials, including sheriff and clerk of courts and county commissioner. We have a heated county commissioner's race this year or 2, et cetera. So all of those are on the ballot. And then in addition to that, we have 3 seats on the school board open for election this year. Ward 1 and Ward 6. Those 2 seats on the school board are open. I believe there's only 1 candidate filed in each of those, but there'll be a ballot for that, and you will have the opportunity to write in another candidate if the one on the ballot is not satisfactory to you. And then voters in all 6 wards will be handed a ballot for the at-large seat on the school board, for which there are no candidates filed during the filing period. And so that will strictly be a write-in ballot. So the opportunity that will be there to all Laconia voters tomorrow to think of someone they would like to see on the school board in the at-large seat and write someone in there so we can fill that seat as well. So those are the ballots that will be handed out tomorrow. And just in case anybody's confused, I think we're all pretty well versed in this. But you cannot change party at this point in time. If you are a registered Republican or Democrat, you have to vote in that primary. You don't have a choice. If you are a registered undeclared, however, you can vote in either primary. And need to take note that if you leave the polling place with that status, you are officially changed to being registered with that party as the ballot that you took. So if you're an undeclared now and you take a Democrat ballot and don't change back, you're on the rolls then as a Democrat registry until you change it. Now, there will be somebody at each polling location who can change you back immediately if you prefer that. So a lot of people will vote in one or the other and then immediately change back to being undeclared, and that's perfectly legal and acceptable to do that. Okay, so we hope we have a decent turnout. There's some hotly contested elections in both parties, and opportunity for all of us to have our say tomorrow. Committee reports. Any committee reports tonight? Are you any closer to Councilor Hamilton's scheduling the
No, I'm not.
committee meeting that had to do with the parking garage? So we haven't forgotten about that. How about liaison reports? Any liaison reports?
If I might just briefly, Mayor, I'd like to point out that Lieutenant Tom Sweat retired August 31st, having served 20 years with the Laconia Police Department and a total of 28 years in law enforcement. He served as a police officer, a field training officer, a patrol sergeant, a detective sergeant, and has significant experience in the area of criminal investigations. He will be sorely missed. In his place, as a sergeant has been promoted to Lieutenant Kevin Butler. Kevin will be, has been promoted to the rank of lieutenant and will assume command of the detective unit while also being responsible for many other duties, including the implementation of the body-worn camera program and the Department's strategic planning. Finally, promoted to sergeant was Rich Carlson. Rich was promoted to sergeant and will enter into the supervisory training program before taking command of a patrol shift. He's very well qualified for the position and has been a police officer for 12 years, holds a bachelor's degree, is an FTO, a taser instructor, an accident reconstructionist, and was a patrol sergeant prior to coming to Laconia in another department. I'd like to congratulate both of those men for their promotions, and again thank Lieutenant Sweat for his time.
Thank you for calling that to our attention, and yes, we all thank Tom Sweat for his years of dedicated service to our city, and wish he and his family Godspeed for their future endeavors. Now, who's going to prepare all these resolutions for us? That's what I want to know.
I've got to break in a new one.
Our packets are full tonight again on various resolutions, looking for grant money.
That might be the reason they retire, is they get put in having to write these grants applications, and they say I either need to get promoted or retire.
And also, the rest of the council shares Councilor in your congratulations for Lieutenant Butler and Sergeant Carlson, wasn't it? Sergeant Carlson.
Yes.
All right, so congratulations to, I don't know Sergeant Carlson, I look forward to making that acquaintance. I've known Kevin Butler for a long, long time, and
Well,
certainly happy for him.
Yes.
He's achieved this status. Okay, we are to, any other liaison reports? All right, we are to City Manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Included in your package for the first meeting of the month, you have the financial and operational trends. We'll start at the top of the first page of that report, page 11, where we show net gain and construction value for the Department of Revenue Administration assessing year, which runs April 1st to March 31st, so we're more than a few months into it now. Building permit value in that year to date is $7.2 million. We're down quite a bit, both from where we were a year ago and 2 years ago, when the numbers were $10 million and $12.3 million. So hopefully we'll be looking for a little bit of an increase and an uptick in building permit activity while the weather is still good through the end of the summer and into the fall months. You can see the call data for the fire and rescue on page 1 and also for police on page 2. Both departments continue to be very busy on a number of fronts. Bottom of page 2 of the report, you'll see the property tax collection. Tax payments were due right at the beginning of July this year. So we're all the way through July and August now, and you can see that we're running at the highest percent collected number, at least as far back as this report goes, which is 2012. So currently we're at 98.62% collected of the July warrant, and that's basically almost or at least 2 full percentage points higher than any point we were at in the prior 6 years. So that continues to be a positive trend. I think that's tied in with the strength of the economy. Has a lot to do with that. We'll see that number be a little more challenged in the collection when the economy might be in a lull. You can also see motor vehicle registrations at the bottom of that page. We're running right on track with where we were last year at this time, although we have increased the budgeted revenue amount by about $200,000. So on a percentage basis, we're a little bit behind so far. but on a dollar amount, we're trending right where we were last year at this time. Third page of the report, where you need the fine readers to get you in there, has all of the overtime data to date. I will turn your attention next to page 5 of the report. You'll see we have a couple of transfers out of some of the impact fee revenue, which were some resolutions that the council approved in conjunction with adoption of the budget. So you can see transfer out for police for one of the small capital items being purchased there, and a transfer out for parks that went towards a playground project as well. Boat tax at the bottom of the page, again, both last year and this year, the month of August, was fairly strong, relatively speaking, in the number of boat registrations. The last page of the report is a brand new document that you will see in the financial and operational trends on a monthly basis, and it still is a work in progress. So I'll kind of walk you through what we have here and what we're hoping this will look like, so it'll create some meaningful information that we can track. And this deals with the ambulance billing, which I think you are all aware that the city finished this arrangement with Lakes Region General Hospital on June 30th, and while the operational end of how we function and run the ambulance through our fire department has not changed, it is our operation now for both the billing end of it and the revenue collection portion of it, which used to be a hospital function. So you can start up at the top left corner of the report under July and under gross charges. That's the amount that we would be looking to bill, and then it's subject to limitations on mostly some of the federal insurance programs. So you can see that $193,000 was the gross amount that we billed. The net amount that we were able to bill out under the various reimbursement payments was $101,000, a little over $101,000. Going across, you can see payments that were received in July were relatively insignificant in terms of $100. And again, the balance owed for the July period of 101. And I'll get back to that in a second. August is there as well, where the gross charges were $244,000. The net billable amount, the amount that we would expect to collect, was $133,000. A small amount of write-offs that come in various categories for various reasons with administration approval, and then payments collected, and then our overall outstanding balance. What our desire is to do once we've learned how we can create some more customized reports is to really kind of silo, let's use the July billing for instance, and track the July billing and then be able to go July revenue payments coming in, because typically when we're billing out for insurance, the expectation is in most cases you're not getting paid in 30 days. You might be filling out some of the calls on the first week of July, and some of them may not be going out to the last week of July. So even within the month, you might have a variance of 20 days or so when bills are being paid. So we want to start tracking in that silo, if you will, is the July billables versus July revenue, so we can see how much we collect after 30 days, what we collect after 60 days. The norm in talking with the billing companies and their experience in doing this is probably that 60, maybe to 75-day window from when a bill is received is typically when they're seeing payment. So we bill out $100,000 in July. Realistically, we're not expecting to see that money, or very little of that money, roll in July. More of it in August and probably in the September timeframe. So rather than just keep a rolling total and saying, you know, year to date we've billed out $240,000, but we've only collected $47,000, that kind of skews it a little bit for the reasons I just stated. So as we work to customize these reports, it'll be more useful for us as staff to be able to look at those trends, and ultimately, you know, at the end of 120 days, how much of that July billing is still out there to be collected. And at that point, the billing company we're working with, you know, after 90 days is starting to send letters, make telephone calls, and those types of things. So we want to track it. We want to see what our ultimate success rate is for collection within, you know, those benchmarks, and then how much we have to go to additional measures. Down toward the bottom, what the finance director has done is we've estimated $1,025,000 in revenue off of the ambulance this year. So on just dividing that number by 12, it basically means that we need to bill out net charges of about $85,000 a month in order to generate the $1,025,000. Now again, we know that we're not going to be successful in collecting every dollar that we bill. So again, once we get a little more trend and a little more history of payments being received, we'll be able to track and know exactly where we are. So this is kind of the first put down on paper of getting this information, but we know there's a lot more work that we want to do to it to make it more useful to you, and we're all just learning that system right now.
Scott, the company that we have billing, they, their percentage that they get, is it on the gross, the net, or the amount received? How does that work?
They're doing it on the net, I mean, the net collection, so they're only getting a percentage of what we actually bill, not the gross amount.
Okay, so it's not the amount that we receive, then it's what we're billing.
No, it's the amount that they're successful collecting, so that there's
Okay.
the carrot and the stick, if you will, for them to go out and, not be overly aggressive, but go out and work on our behalf, because if they're successful in getting some unpaid invoices paid, they're gaining a percentage of that as well. And our expectation is that, they are going after that. I know in some cases, when the hospital was collecting, maybe the hospital wasn't going after some of the smaller dollar amounts out of $100 difference on a deductible being paid on insurance, but enough of those $100 add up, and if the lion's share of that money is staying with the city, we certainly want to go and collect that. That being said, we understand there's a big difference between a $100 balance remaining on a bill versus someone who maybe didn't have insurance or hasn't paid anything, and thousands of dollars out there, and we will try to treat those accordingly. The company we're working with has a very strong, positive record of work here in New Hampshire. I think the finance director mentioned at the last meeting that she and our deputy EMS chief, Sean Riley, went down to Derry, which is one of the communities that they're handling, and were able to talk with some of the staff in Derry town offices who were very helpful and have been using this company for a number of years, so we were able to kind of glean some information and help us get our arms around this a little bit. So this is a work in progress, but at least wanted to present it, and this will be out there monthly because we need to make sure that we're hitting revenue numbers on this as far as how this is being set up as a special revenue account.
So,
Just a question, Scott. Thanks. This is, I think, great information. Would you? I know I could sit here and do this on my calculator, but would you consider putting in percentages next to, say, net charges versus gross charges? I'd like to see that trend analysis, and any other percentages you could put in there would just make the dashboard a little faster to read. That's all. And I would just like to see what trends emerge from what we're charging on the gross, what we're collecting, how much we're writing off as a percentage of our gross charges, and certainly the payments and the balance and how those relate to our net charges as well.
Okay.
the revenue adjustments is the commission? Where are the commissions going to show up on this?
That's a net of the amount collected, so that would be, that comes in off of the balance. So whatever the balance collected was, I think we're at either somewhere right in the 6% neighborhood is what the collection agency is getting. So we'll have to put a column in there for payments and then net payments, because a percentage of that would be reduced as well.
Another question I have, or assumption, am I correct in assuming that accounts receivable balance is figured on net charges?
Yes. Yeah. We just put the gross there so you get an understanding of, what could be billed if some of the federal programs weren't in place that had a limit on it. So some with private insurance or no insurance might be receiving a bill for the, for the full amount. It's I know health insurances have changed over the years, but I think we probably all remember that, you went to the doctor's office for X and here is what the charge was, but the physician agreed to take the usual and customary charge in your area, which was a negotiated rate that was less than that. So that's similar to what we're doing here, what the gross charge was and what the amount that we're billed under. And most of these are either Medicaid or Medicare. That's the lion's share of our billables by a long shot is Medicare and Medicaid.
So when we set those rates last year, it was largely fund money, meaning those are the gross charges.
Those are the gross charges, but some of those, so maybe around 25% of our book of business is either private insurance, no insurance, or workers' comp, those types of things. So some of that is real money that will materialize.
Well, yeah, no, I know some of it is, but I mean, it's,
Yes.
the rates we set.
It does not cover probably 70% or more of what we're able to build, because, again, the lion's share is through one of the two
All right,
federal
so
programs.
last question to help me here. On accounts receivable balance at the end of August was $182,000. Does that include the $133,256 in new net charges?
Yes, so that's a combination of the 101 July net and the 133 August net. So we billed out roughly the 244,000. If you back off the write-off and you back off the payments, that's the balance that's on the books right now that still is in receivable.
Including the current.
Yes.
Why is there such a large difference between the gross charge and the net charge on the August? Is that just what the insurance companies accept?
That's mostly Medicare or Medicaid, which have the fixed prices. So if for some reason, and I don't say this happened, but if 50% of your business was private insurance pay and 50% was a federal program, you'd probably see the gap narrow significantly. If 80% was the federal program, which is locked in as to what you can charge, and only 20% private, you're going to see. So again, an large overwhelming portion of our business on the ambulance where it's getting covered and paid for is either through Medicaid or Medicare.
So it's a blended revenue stream that it really isn't predictable as such.
I think if you look at it over 12 months,
Yeah.
the blend will be part of the trend and kind of flush out for you. I mean, the hospitals had that data for years, and we're the same, we get the same customers.
Yeah.
So I think there's some trend to it.
Just for a quick, when we look at this down the road, just for a quick glance, if we look at accounts receivable balance, which is 182 at the end of the last month, and the net charge is 133, we know that the difference between those two numbers is everything that's 30 days or older out, correct?
Not necessarily, because we don't just bill once a month. So in July or August, you could have bills that go out in the first week, and you have bills that go out the last week. So some of those August bills probably just went out right before Labor Day, and realistically, we're not expecting to turn around in a couple of days. So that's really why we think the
But in general, it would be a
yes,
snapshot.
but that's why we think the siloing of by month to be able to show, and again, our first month of doing this is July, so we'd be able to show July isolated and say after 30 days, here's what we collected. After 60 days, here's what we collected. So we start understanding better when we expect to have the lion's share of revenue received from the billables.
All right, other questions or comments?
Where's the money coming from to offset the expenses if we're not getting the revenues that are coming out of the general fund for now?
We'd have to have that conversation if and when that time comes. I mean, right now, operationally, I mean, we're covering, payroll and that type of stuff as we would, doing anything else. But at the end of the 12 months, at the end of the fiscal year, again, we will still be rebooking, we will be booking anything that's out in May and June that maybe we haven't collected yet. That will be booked to come back and be a receivable for the year in which the expense was incurred, in which the ambulance transport occurred. So even when we end the fiscal year on June 30th, I don't expect us to be at 100% or 95% of the revenue billed, because we know some of those bills just went out in May and June. So it's probably going to take us until September of next year to really close the books, for the most part, on what happened up through and including June 30th. But again, I think
Because
that
they kept all receivables.
the hospital in the past did the billing and collected all the receivables, and we didn't have any role in that. But we know there's going to be that lag. And that's why I think it's important to get that monthly trend. If it's isolated, we know that, after 120 days, we've collected 90% of July billables. We can look to see how that trend runs as we isolate the August billables. Are we still on track that 90% is received within 120 days? And that way, when we do close the year, and you ask me that question, are we going to hit our numbers? I can say, well, we've got 8 months of hard data, and if we look at the trend over, March, April, May, and June, we know that we would collect 90% of that, and therefore our assumption is we're going to hit our number or we're going to come short, and that's when the conversation.
Everything, just so we understand, everything that was on the books as of June 30th belongs to the hospital.
Yes, anything that was billed June 30th or prior was still going to the hospital. We took over our billing as
We have
of...
no accounts receivable as of July 1, 0. So that's
Yeah.
why there's going to be an overlap.
So probably we got to kind of figure that we would be 3 months lagging that we would have to cash flow for the ambulance service.
That's what the trend is going to show us, yes.
Yeah.
But that's not a huge number. I mean, we cash flow a number of,
Yeah.
of things and pay back. So if you think of 3 months of billables that are averaging 120,000, that's $350,000, $400,000 that we've got on the books as a receivable. That's not a huge amount in the terms of city operations.
Okay.
All right. I'm all set. So we would have the next part, we have the planning director here tonight.
19B is yours as well.
Yes.
It's a good report.
So following up on a request from Councilor Cheney a couple of weeks ago, discussions on short-term rentals. What can we do right now? What are some options we can present? What are some opportunities to look at going forward through either enforcement or zoning? What's allowed locally, what the state currently allows us to do. So what I've asked Dean Trefethen, our planning director, to do tonight is just to kind of frame maybe more at a 10,000-foot view of what some options are to get a sense of where the council would like to go with this. And then obviously there we can move forward and work with our legal counsel and our staff to put your ideas into a more structured, formalized format at that point. So I'm just put the handout to you, and I'd like to turn it over to Dean at this point to kind of walk through and then take some questions. And then I know you've put the citizen comment after that to allow our citizens to chime in as well.
For those in our audience, we're welcoming Green Teflon, who is our planning director. Welcome, sir.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councilors. Wanted to define exactly what we're talking about. The city manager just gave a very brief description of that. The short-term rentals that we're talking about are essentially a property owner or maybe somebody who's leasing a property that's not running a recognized hospitality type business. i.e. it's not a hotel, it's not a motel, it's not a cottage colony, or any of the traditional things that we think of as being tourist cabins or open, single overnight or 2 or 3 overnight type combinations. So we're not talking about that. What we are talking about is a unit of housing that's used normally by an individual or a family. We're talking about single-family houses. We could be talking about apartments. We could be talking about townhouses, condos, those kinds of things that are normally one family on a year-round basis. Short-term rental could be for one night or multiple nights, and it could be for one room or a whole house apartment. If you go onto some of these websites to do the short-term rentals, you get all kinds of things. Sometimes it's one room and the owner is there. Sometimes it's the whole house and nobody's there. Depends on what the individual is offering. This is not to be confused with you own a house or you're renting an apartment and you get a roommate who's paying you part of the bill to be a roommate. We're not talking about that kind of situation either. To put things into perspective, we have had one property in the city in the past few months that has had multiple complaints about it. And this is people who have called the office or have been into the planning office to complain about the property. We've had some inquiries about 2 or 3 other properties. The complaints for the one official property that we've had complaints about and the others are centered on noise, trash removal, and trespassing on adjacent property. The nature of all of these complaints, the noise, trash removal, and trespassing, are not zoning issues. They are police or DPW issues. And we have encouraged people who have been complaining about the noise, who have been complaining about the trash, to make their complaints to the police or to the DPW to get them corrected. However, updated zoning rules or regulations could indirectly take care of some of those problems, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we get in later on in this presentation. The property that we have had the official complaints about is being advertised as a weekend party rental for up to 22 people. I think that you can probably see what the issue is immediately from that kind of a description.
Is that literal wording? Have you seen the ad?
Yeah.
It says party house?
Doesn't say party house, but, you know, it's weekend fun, it's weekend, you know, that kind of thing. Airbnb is the largest online service, but there are many others. The other couple other big ones are VRBO and Home2Go. At the end of June, when we had the initial complaints about the one property that I'm talking about, Airbnb, just Airbnb, had 201 listings for Laconia. Last week we checked it, the listings, was 141 just for properties in Laconia. Now, not all of these listings are for houses or apartments. Some are for hotel, motel, cottages. It's just another advertising mechanism for a lot of the traditional hospitality businesses to try to drive business into their units. And we didn't take the time to dwell that out, but the point is there's a number of properties in the city that are using these services one way or another. We'd like to talk a minute here about...
So
Sure.
just interrupt you just a second, just so we get an idea of the scope of this. So just ballpark, you have a guess of the 141 Laconia listings. If we eliminated the hospitality type businesses from that, recognized hospitality type businesses, how many would be?
Just off the top guess, I would say 40 to 50% are probably hospitality type units, and the rest are probably single family type situations.
So at any given time, there's about 80
Give or take, yeah. Yep,
non-traditional properties that are for rent.
correct. Yep. Or at least on that snapshot anyway. Yep. Let's talk a little bit about the current status of regulation. Right now, the zoning ordinance has no mechanism to regulate this activity. We have no definition one way or the other that applies to this kind of use. It was not a contemplated type of situation when the zoning ordinance was written, or it's been updated over the years. And so without a proper definition, we can't say yes or no to an individual property. State law does not address the issue either, and without, as you know, an expressed consent from the legislature for the city to regulate, that we can't probably put some restrictions on the activity. As in almost everything else in the state, if the legislature hasn't given the municipalities express authority to at least give them the option of doing some type of legislation. You know, we think of New Hampshire as being a home rule state, but we all know that that's not really the case. And as you know from the city manager's report a couple of weeks ago, and his request to you on the NHMA list of initiatives, that short-term rentals is one of the things that was on that list that they want to tackle during the next legislative session. Interesting side note to all of this, even though the state doesn't regulate or have any regulations for this, they have entered into an agreement with Airbnb and possibly some other entities to collect the rooms and meals tax on the rentals in the state. So when you go on to Airbnb and decide to rent a place, when you enter your credit card, they're going to add the 9% rooms and meals tax. At that point in time, in the online app or the online program is going to collect the money and send it to them on their regularly scheduled basis. State and national fire codes could provide us a mechanism to control this a little bit. We could at least do some safety inspections, and we might be able to impose some level of regulations based on safety, and this is being explored. Assistant Chief Rovo has talked with the fire marshal. Fire marshal believes that he can enter any building that's being used in this kind of a manner because the state fire marshal thinks this is a business. I think this is a policy decision, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, that we'll have to make a decision on. In a lot of these cases, we're talking about single-family homes that normally either code or the fire department would not be able to go into without some just cause. So this is something we have to think about. And as part of that, we need to note that we have not done any regulation whatsoever or any of the traditional type weekly or weekend rentals of seasonal camps. People who own a summer camp or home on a lake and decide they want to rent it out for a week or 2 or 5 weeks during the summer to help pay off their property taxes or whatever the case may be. We have no regulation of that. We have very little knowledge of that activity. I couldn't even begin to guess how many units are out there doing this kind of a thing on either all summer long or a few weeks out of the summer or even winter rentals. We have no data on that, and it has not been an issue. We have not received complaints from people that I'm aware of. So if we want to tackle the short-term rentals, I think we need to make some type of distinction between those kinds of short-term rentals that we have been allowing to occur in the city with no oversight for decades, and this new kind of oversight for this new kind of issue that has arisen. So that's definitely a policy decision, and I will use that.
So if I own a camp on August Park Road, as an example, or what was once a camp, and I'm renting it out a day or a week at a time for years, we have not had any role in regulating that.
Correct. Nor have we been receiving any complaints. I'm sure that there are noise complaints or those kinds of things that have been going to police or
They're shooting off fireworks or something.
those kinds of things, absolutely. But from a standpoint of someone calling out and saying, hey, I think they're renting out the place next door, it's been, zero type of communication. Moving on to the next page.
So the difference there would be how we define short-term rental versus long-term rental. Like I know we do regulate the rental of a mother-in-law apartment or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, it would all be in the definition and how broad you want to make that definition or how narrow you want to make it. And that would lead into the next page. This is where we get into the nuts and bolts of if given permission from the legislature, what we could do. First thing would be to update Laconia zoning. We'd have to create a definition for short-term rental. The definition should include the length of stay. We could say it's 6 nights or less to try to get around that traditional weekly camp rental type situation. Maybe we don't want to make it that long. Maybe we want to make it longer. I mean, that's the kind of thing that collectively we need to decide. And of course, exclude the traditional hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts, cottage colonies, etc., because they obviously rent on a nightly basis or a weekly basis and have done so for decades. The question becomes, though, and this is where it gets kind of tricky to define a short-term rental, is how is an Airbnb rental for someone that's renting it out for 3 or 4 nights or even a week, how is that just different than the traditional rental, summer type rental that we have seen for years at people's individual cottages or camps? It's a different mechanism, but the concept is the same, if you're following me. If you own a summer camp and you've been renting it out 3 or 4 weeks of the year, and you've been doing it on your own by word of mouth, or you rent to friends or whatever it is, how is that fundamentally different than if you go onto one of these online websites and say, okay, I've got a summer cottage and I want to rent it out for a week? The activity is the same, and the end result is the same. You have people in this unit of housing for X amount of time that are not the owners, they're not, relatives or whatever. So that's the thing that we have to understand and kind of and include as part of that definition.
Could we outright ban short-term rental?
Currently, we could not. If the legislature gives us the permission to do so, we could do that.
Under current New Hampshire law, you cannot ban short-term rental.
According to our legal counsel, currently, there's no mechanism to do that.
Regardless of what zone it's in.
Correct.
And it doesn't matter how you define short-term rental.
At this point in time, correct. We have to decide which zones to do this in. You know, we have the infamous commercial resort zone, in which we allow a lot of things in, and this would kind of be one of those zones you'd say, yeah, okay, you know, we've got a lot of hospitality things going on in this zone already. It would make perfect sense to allow short-term rental in that zone. I think the discussion becomes about all the other zones of the city. There are pros and cons to whichever zone, whether it's single family or whether it's residential general or whether it's a downtown commercial core, whatever. You know, you're going to have these issues of number of people, parking, those kinds of things, noise, etc. You're going to have these issues. It doesn't matter. You know, in the one that's caused us the most concern happens to be right on the lake, and it's one of its main attractions. But when you look at some of the listings that are on these online sites, a lot of these single-family houses or apartments or whatever that are being offered, they're just in regular residential zones. People want to rent these things for short term, not necessarily for vacation. Sometimes they're on a business trip. They just don't want to stay in a hotel or a bed and breakfast. They want to be in a home setting. Sometimes they have a loved one that's in the hospital and they want to stay someplace for a few days. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that people want to do this, and they just don't want to use the traditional hospitality type establishments, and so they're using. So it's not just a lakefront problem; it's everywhere in the city. So there's pros and cons to any zone. You just got to, you know, it's policy decision that we would collectively have to make. Our proposal would be, if we get to that point, would be to do this by administrative approval because it's the easiest thing to do. It's quick. And what we'd be looking for is the applicant's plan for parking, garbage removal, and also so that we can get a point of contact, the address, phone number, or email or something, a point of contact, so that if there is an issue, whether it's noise or whether it's trash or whether it's parking, whatever the issue may be, we have someone that we can call and hopefully they can take care of that on a quick basis. Right now, we don't know who these people are, and trying to track down property owners sometimes is difficult, and it's also very time consuming. So the idea of the administrative approval is to gather information just so we know who's doing it, where they're doing it, and how we can get in contact with them if there is an issue. As part of that, the suggestion is to enact license requirement to obtain a license at a fee after the zoning administrative approval. We're suggesting not through the licensing board, only because they only meet periodically, so that there's a time lapse there. So maybe a different mechanism to do that as opposed to the licensing board, I'm just picking a fee off the top of my head, $1,600. The idea here is to us to recover our costs for doing the inspection, not to try to make money, but someone from code would go out and inspect the home, someone from fire would go out and make sure that there's smoke detectors, the windows are the proper size for egress, those kinds of things. It's a quick inspection, but there's staff involved, and the idea is just to kind of recoup those expenses, not to make money. And again, we want to make sure that the properties are safe for the potential renters. What we'd be looking for is annual inspections of smoke detectors, safety egress requirements, and maybe some other things to be determined. And we may have a system where we can waive the inspection on subsequent years. There hasn't been any complaints about a particular property, or there were no issues found in the previous, we might be able to just kind of roll things along. That requires defining a criteria and a process, which we certainly can do. And of course, we would want them to pay the rooms and meals tax. Not that we get a lot of that, but whatever we get, we get. So that would be good. So that's what, again, going back to the headline on that page, if we get the legislative approval to do something, those are the kinds of things that we could do, and I think would go a long way to addressing some of the situations that we have here. So how do we get there? Obviously, the above would require amendments to the zoning ordinance and the licensing ordinance, maybe a rewrite or maybe just a new section, however we work that out. The other option is to, instead of a licensing, maybe just call it a recurring inspection fee that's administered under zoning or for code enforcement. As I mentioned, we need some form of state legislation enacted. The NHMA is going to be pursuing that. And then, as we do on many things when it comes to code enforcement and zoning enforcement, we do rely on neighbor complaints. We could have the staff periodically look over the listings, and we can send letters to property owners, the ones that are not aware of if we've enacted any of these requirements for the property owners that are not aware of it, to let them know that you just can't, put a listing on Airbnb and collect $100 a night and call it a day, that there are some requirements. A little thing that does come up, because my son uses Airbnb all the time, and he's told me these different things, and I go, so I was thinking about some of the different things that he's told me about, that he's come across in the places that he stayed in, and this is one of the things that kind of popped out to me. The person that's doing the rental, putting it on an online listing, may not be the actual property owner. It may be someone that's renting an apartment or renting a condo or a house or whatever they're in, and they're the ones trying to do the short-term rental because they're going to be out of town for a couple of weeks, so they want to try to make some money and get some people into the thing there. So, we'd be contacting the property owner to try to get enforcement, but it may not be the property owner that's doing it, maybe somebody else. So it's just something that we have to be aware of. We've got to kind of create a mechanism to do that. That is what we have so far.
Questions, comments from the council?
Thank you. Dean, I'm concerned, I mean, for instance, the suggestion that non-vacationers may be using these makes all the sense in the world. It usually isn't 20 people, and usually the parking doesn't compete with Vista's parking lot. I went by that place on Old North Main, and it had more cars than the rest of the neighborhood combined. It just seems to me there must be some way in the zoning ordinance we can say a number of vehicles commensurate with the number of bedrooms, or there must be some formula we could come up with relatively quickly to keep the number of people and the number of vehicles at a reasonable level.
We could. However, think about the times at your individual house where you've had an event of some kind. Graduation party, family party, birthday party, Christmas, the family gets together for Christmas. You got 20 people in your house, you've got 8 cars, you've only got parking for 3 or 4 in your driveway, whatever the case may be. It's a different situation, but it's the same situation, and that's where we get into the issue of, for instance, when the planning board approves multifamily housing, I mean, we do have parking requirements as part of those plans. Generally, it's 1.5 spaces per unit. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, depends on where it is and what's going on. But when it comes to single-family houses, the state has left us in its, whether it's, I don't think it's by design, I just think nobody's thought about this problem too much prior to the past few years, so it's a relatively new situation. Airbnb is disrupting hospitality and issues surrounding it, just as Uber upset taxis and those kinds of things. So it's a new technology doing the exact same thing. So yes, we could do some type of a correlation of X number of parking spaces per bedroom or X number of parking spaces per whatever, but there's always situations that for the average person who is not doing any of these things, they would exceed those limits as well.
Yeah, but they wouldn't be doing it a week at a time or 4 or 5 days at a time. They'd be,
Granted, yes, right. But people have parties and they have noise and they shoot off fireworks and you know, whether it's...
I'm at an age where none of those are my concern. But for those people who are concerned, I understand it. I guess, for me, I'm looking for some suggestions, concrete suggestions, sooner rather than later. I understand about the state as well as anybody in this room, with one possible exception. But waiting for them to fix this problem, I'll be long retired. I suspect everybody here will be long retired. These folks need relief now. And there must be something we can do reasonably quickly. I guess I'm asking you to please come to us very quickly with some thoughts. I think it's up to the council, obviously, to decide whether we want to do those things. But if you could come in and say, you know, 1,000 square feet, 3 cars, and 4 people, I don't know what, but it's some formula, something to at least start this process. We can talk about this till the cows come home, but how about let's come up with 1 or 2 concrete proposals to try and, to see if the council will accept it.
I think the issue is going to be, which has been hinted at many times in this 4 or 5 page document here, is that it's going to have to be a regulation of broad strokes, meaning there's going to be all kinds of people and places caught in that net that you weren't aiming at in the first place. And
But Mayor, I would suggest that's a decision for us to make when the
I mean,
proposal.
we could do that in 2-3 weeks. I mean,
And
we could
that's-
pass an ordinance that says that you can't host more cars than will fit in your driveway or, you know, in front of your own property, that if you, any of your guests have to park in front of somebody else's property, then you have to have a permit. You know, we could pass that tomorrow, but can you imagine what the reaction to that would be?
I can, but I also think there ought to be some proposals on the table for us to look at and make a yea or nay decision.
I mean, to me, the biggest issue is that, the simplest issue is the answer to the question I asked earlier, and that was apparently there's no enabling legislation that would allow a city or town under current state law to simply ban short-term rentals. We could consider doing that if we were allowed to, but we're being told we're not allowed to.
But legislation is like sausage making. It's an ugly process. And
And whether the legislature will quickly do such a thing next year or whether it will even be proposed, I have no idea. But, you know, that seems to be a relatively easy fix to me because, again, it's a local option. It's not telling any city or town they have to do that. It's simply providing the enabling umbrella to say you can if you want to. You have the power to regulate that if you want to. Right now, we don't, apparently. Correct?
Correct. I mean, Councilor Cheney, the only immediate thing that I see that we have any chance of doing in that would be through fire inspections. And if you want me to circle back around with
I mean, it just seems to me the logical solution to this and the simplest, if we want to go that direction, would be to ban short-term rentals, however we define that, within certain residential zones.
and you can do that as long as nobody takes you to court, and you know you can get away with it. But you're probably not going to be in that situation for long. And the only community that we're aware of that has anything close, and it's not really what you're talking about, has been Portsmouth, and that's going through the court system right now as to whether that's going to be the silver bullet or not. You know, but their restriction is not the kind of thing that we're talking about right now. It's more, much more laser focused and more specific to certain areas of their community. But nonetheless, I have no idea what this who's going to be finished with the course. So that may give us an indication every night.
Did I understand you to say that we could, I presume by zoning, at least require that we learn the owner of the property and
Not at the current time. Our legal counsel says that basically, when it comes to individual property, New Hampshire is still somewhat of a property rights state, so therefore, you want to do this, you can.
Can we ask the city manager to advise us as to whether or not there has been any pointed conversation yet at the municipal association level in terms of legislation?
It's come up in conversations over this past year and more frequently, and that actually is one of the policy positions that you all voted on that's going on, and I will remind you, it's this Friday if anybody wants to be the delegate at the conference in Concord on Friday. But yes, that is one of the policies, and for the reason of trying to, and I think, Mr. Mayor, you hit it right, is to provide enabling legislation, not saying that you have to do this, but for the communities it does impact, what are you able to do within that? So depending on where that policy is, and I don't have that document in front of me, but if it's a high priority action policy, it means the NHMA will actively be seeking to draft language and work with sponsors to get it in. And I can look at that document and let you all know tomorrow as to what standing it was for priority. And if that's something that you would like me to pull from what we would call the consent calendar, and strictly for the purpose of raising its level of actionability, I'm happy to do that. I mean, obviously, I think we want to support that going forward. If it's a lower tier, maybe there's an opportunity that other communities would chime in and say, no, this needs to be a higher priority and this ought to come to the forefront. So I can get that information to you tomorrow. And, but I guess to give you some direction tonight, if it is not the highest tier, would that be something that you would like me to see if we can't get it classified up to a more of an action step as opposed to just a policy position?
I
Anyone
think so.
else?
Yeah.
Anyone else or Alan?
Is that yes?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Going along with Councilor Cheney's, what he just said, can a city or any town officials ask that if they advertise as a B&B, I'm not a B&B, but Airbnb or whatever, to register with the town or the city? Or is that the legislation that you need?
Yeah, that would be kind of where the enacting legislation enabling legislation would be needed to have that requirement. Legal counsel is saying that as I said before, presently, you want a single-family house, it's your house. If you want to do this, then that's your right to do that because the state has not given us the option to prohibit it.
So basically what we're hearing is that our only action that the city can take is if they put trash out on a sidewalk or noise that they call the police or
Absolutely.
something like that.
Yeah, we could regulate the number of cars, we could regulate the noise level, we could regulate all kinds of.
For those things like that is already on the books for the most part.
Oh, yeah, in the case of the home that we're all talking about, we have encouraged the neighbors to call the police when it's noisy and contact DPW about the trash. And I know we have had discussions, different city people have had discussions with the property owner, and I don't know that we're making great headway with it, but they're certainly aware that we're looking anyway.
Even though we couldn't require someone to do a registry, I mean, if we wanted to invest staff time and identify addresses, we certainly could send a letter saying, we're doing a voluntary registry and we noticed your property's there, and in order to be a good neighbor, would you kindly provide us, a good phone number to reach you at, or your property manager? But again, that would strictly be voluntary compliance. There'd be no teeth to it.
It'd be 1 in 1,000.
So, I mean, you could invest some time, but your returns are probably going to be relatively low, and probably the ones who may choose to do it are the ones who aren't, having any issues with their neighbors and are trying to be, good in their neighborhood.
It sounds like our only recourse is through but you're going to check it.
Again, our power derives from the state, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago, for the most part, this wasn't on anybody's radar. So, I mean, communities across the state are looking at these types of things with their zoning ordinances and what they have on the books.
Anyone else? Okay, hang around. I think we're going to get some comment here. All right, so we are now to the aforementioned citizens' request to comment on current agenda items. So this would be the appropriate time for anyone in our audience tonight who wishes to address the council on a matter that is on tonight's agenda, including the subject just discussed. Former Mayor Fitzgerald, welcome, sir.
Thank you. I would digress for a moment and congratulate Chief Cheney on his 38th wedding anniversary. Mrs. Cheney is to my right. You certainly know how to show a woman a good time.
Yeah.
I sat there for 4 years and it never would have crossed my mind. Thank you for your time tonight. I know it's valuable, and I'm going to be very brief because there are a number of folks that would like to address you, hopefully equally as briefly. I have a fundamental disagreement with Dean, and it's a respectful disagreement, and I don't think that you are as limited as he may believe that you are. I've been practicing municipal law for 42 years, and I would not ask you to substitute my judgment for that of your own legal counsel by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think the issue of the limits of your authority, or from my point of view, the expansion of your authority, is as closed as you may believe it is. The zoning statutes of the state of New Hampshire are broad and expansive. They give you a large grant of power to regulate a wide variety of activities for the benefit of the citizenry of the residents of Laconia, for the public welfare, health and safety, and for other purposes as well, as spelled out in the enabling legislation. You have in your zoning ordinance 8 or 9 pages of activities that the city has listed over the years as being specifically allowed with conditions, or not allowed. And I can guarantee you that you will not find specific statutes enabling or forbidding these activities in the zoning statutes of the state of New Hampshire. And the B&B situation is no different. You certainly have the right and the authority to regulate home occupations, boarding houses, hotels, motels, other forms of residences. And in fact, your residential uses are probably one of the largest categories in your table of uses. It's my belief, and again, I'm not suggesting that you substitute my judgment for legal counsel's, but it's my belief that you do have this authority. And I would suggest, I don't think this is going to be resolved tonight, but hopefully there could be a dialogue between myself, my folks who are here to speak to you tonight, and legal counsel, maybe at the committee level or something along those lines, to explore that issue a little further. To get to the issue at heart, what the folks are asking you to do tonight is to take action, and not asking you to take the action tonight, but what they're asking you to do is to take action that will prevent there from being unplanned fundamental changes in their neighborhoods. Laconia is made up of a number of traditional neighborhoods, and they're spread out throughout the entire city. The activities that are coming in town now in terms of the Airbnb systems are allowing a single lot to be used in a manner completely inconsistent with other lots. And what we're talking about tonight is a single example. It's the one that brought up before. It's the one that I have written to Councilor Cheney, the mayor, and Councilor Lippman about before. But it's symptomatic of something that can happen anywhere in the city, because as has been pointed out already this evening by Dean, and I think accurately, someone can pick a place simply to have a base of operation, and we don't know what that base of operation is going to be used for. And I don't mean that in a sinister sense, but it could be a vacation home, it could be a business home, but if it's all of a sudden it's a short-term rental, you can almost guarantee that it's going to be used for something other than the traditional family uses in single-family residence multifamily zones or the like, whether it be the northern end of the city, the southern end of the city, or anywhere else, including the commercial resort zone. The property that we're talking about specifically this evening, and I'll name it, it's 1345 Old North Main Street. It's a lakefront property on Lake Okeechee. Was built as a single-family home, I believe, sometime in the 60s, maybe early 70s. It's a nice home, there's no doubt about it. It was used as a single-family home for many decades, until this year, when all of a sudden it was used for what's been referred to this evening as a party house. It has, as I understand it, I haven't been in it since the conversion, but I understand that it's been converted to allow up to 20 people to use it at a time. The activities that the neighbors have complained of and have brought to my attention include, but aren't limited to, loud noises and partying well into the late hours of the evening. And you remember that these folks are up here for vacation, so you would expect that. Unfortunately, everyone else around them is trying to sleep, and it's not in the commercial resort zone.
What was the word you used there?
Pardon me?
What was the word you used that was going on until all hours?
Loud noises and partying.
Oh, okay.
I believe that's what I said.
I thought you were more descriptive than that.
I wasn't trying to be. There's been profanity. There's been outdoor urination. There's been fireworks. There's been a variety of mechanical noises, including air horns, car horns, well into the evening, music, the use of karaoke machines, which of course we all love at 2 a.m. from the neighbors, things of the like. There's been examples where the neighbors' properties have been abused. People that have been at this particular site have had fires, burnt campfire materials and so forth, and then literally dumped the burnt embers over the fence into the next lot's yard. That's completely unacceptable. There's been huge accumulations of trash, which has been brought to the city's attention. Multiple instances of young tenants using going on to the other properties around, which again, if you're, in an area where there's a lot of resorts and people go from one resort to another, that's one thing. You go from one house to another, that's a very different thing. The constant noise and activities have been more than the folks up there are willing to put up with. There was a period of time where they were willing to sit and watch and wait and see what happened. There has been some direct contact with the owner, but what we're asking you to do are two things. One, this particular property should be acted into through the enforcement mechanisms that are available to you. We do believe that you should also use the licensing mechanism that has been talked about previously in terms of code enforcement, fire and safety mechanisms to act into the situation. But more importantly than that, don't take this simply as an isolated instance from one group of neighbors that needs to be dealt with short term, and then this is going to go away, because it won't. It'll crop up elsewhere. And so we'd ask you to take a citywide view of it, because it may very well be a citywide problem. We've heard tonight that there's somewhere between 80 and 120 of these things going on at any given time. This is not going to be the only problem, but this is the one that raised its hand, brought it to your attention, and gives you the opportunity to act into it before you have to act till you do 10, 20, 30, or more. I indicated that I was going to be brief, and those are the points that I wanted to make. I do want to turn it over to folks that will give you their first-hand experience, and I think you'll see that something really does need to be done to deal with this situation. Certainly, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, Bob.
Yes, Paul.
I'm sorry.
Counselor Hamel, you have the floor.
Thank you. So using your experience in your law, do you think the city could ask them to register as a Airbnb, and we could go and inspect and say you can only have this amount of people there, and that kind of thing?
I think they'd have that power, yeah.
If not, they'll challenge it, then we'll find out, right?
Well, that's the way it works.
Yeah, it is.
And I don't say that lightly because I realize that there's a lot involved in that. But I do think you have that authority.
So any Airbnbs that are in town that advertise online or whatever, then you feel we have the right to ask them to
I
register?
don't know, I mean, you have to be careful about how you write the regulations. I would agree
Yeah.
with Dean 100%
Yeah.
on that. I think you'd want to talk in terms of the length of the rental, the number of folks, and things along those lines. But I don't think it's one where we have to say, the legislature hasn't specifically granted authority to deal with B&Bs, so we can't do anything about this. They haven't granted, at least to my knowledge, they haven't granted anything to do with equestrian uses, but that's in your zoning ordinance as well.
Yeah, well, when we give a permit, an occupancy permit to a house, well, no, they're on city sewer, not septic, so, because I mean, septic, you can only have so many bedrooms, you know, for the house for the septic system, that's all city water, city sewer over there.
Yeah.
That would make a difference, so, yeah.
I think the thing that I keep coming back to is that we alluded to earlier is that you start trying to if you could successfully politically regulate in broad scope and whatever falls within that falls within that, but then you start saying, oh, well, let's make an exception for, you know, like right now, for example, you can't have a chicken in a residential area in Coney. But if we start saying, well, you can have one if it promises not to crow between, you know, 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., then you're okay. Or if it doesn't cluck louder than so many decibels or something or other. You understand what I'm getting at? I'm getting at, as opposed to just saying, no, you can't do this, period. Don't care, in a certain zone, by zone. It's outlawed, you can't do it, then we don't get into the, well, yes, you can do it, but no, you can't, or yes, you met this certain requirement, so yes, you can do it, and we're spending time regulating things and the what ifs and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to just saying you either can do it or you can't do it.
Well, I think the registration would be anywhere in the city. They would have to register as one of these things. And you could come up with some kind of
But for what
guidelines.
purpose, so
Well,
what?
that's what I'm saying, we'd have to find out what guidelines we could do.
But I would suggest, Bob, that registration all by itself doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
Because this, you know, to deal with the one that I'm talking about this evening, they could go in, they could register, they could get a, you know, the administrative permit as Dean's describing it, and no one would be the wiser. I think we've got to have a situation where there's neighborhood notification, there's input and so forth. I'm not suggesting that it needs to be a zoning variance and go through all that process. But this caught people completely unawares, and that's what needs to be prevented in the future.
So this house you're talking about, you said they remodeled the house to accommodate more people?
It's my understanding, and again, I have not been into the house, but I think that people will probably address you this evening that have gone through all the ads and so forth. It's my understanding that basically the lower level, the basement, has been turned into a dormitory with bunk beds.
They need a
And
permit
that
to do that.
a
So
single
they're
family,
advertising that it sleeps 20.
right,
22.
I was just corrected to 22.
So the people who own this building never stay there no more?
It's my understanding that they were up for 1 week this summer. But they're absentee landlords, they are not on the premises when the other folks are coming in and out and so
Are
forth.
these people coming in every week? I mean, is it
Yes.
used that much?
Yes.
So they just have a cleaning service that comes in.
I'm sorry?
They just have a cleaning service that comes in and takes care of the property
No.
Yes,
from one tenant to the next.
correct. Thank you, folks.
All right.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
So the floor for the next few minutes here is open to anyone who wants to address the council on any current agenda items. I'm going to ask that for the time being that we stay on subject here. So if you have something you want to comment on that's not on this topic, if you would hold it for the end, I would appreciate it. Yes, sir.
Let's hear Sarah.
I'm sorry. Sarah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
That's all right. So now that the subject is short-term rental.
Yes, My name is Sarah Rosenblum. I live right next door to the property that we've been talking about. I'm at 1359 Old North Main. And everything Paul said about the incidents, the occurrences that made us become aware that it was being used as a short-term rental are absolutely true. And it's worse. You know, it's if they had applied to build a hotel there, they would have been turned down because it's not an appropriate use of the property. But that's what they're doing, effectively. There are new people there. They stay for various amounts of time. They're unrelated, or, you know, they're certainly not a single family. And it's the use of the property, which is exactly what zoning addresses. It's being used as a business. And it's not in keeping with the residential single-family zoning that we have in place. So it seems to us, who live next to this property and are experiencing it and having it changed, that this person is coming in and single-handedly, unilaterally changing the use of the property and changing the zoning. And I don't think the city should be powerless in the face of that. Like, why are we letting this happen in the face of a stable neighborhood that's working for Laconia? People like living there. They take care of their property. It's safe. And, you know, it's a neighborly place. People invest in the city. They serve on boards. They send their kids to school. You know, it's a neighborhood that works. And I think as a city, we can't afford not to support this and let the city change without taking conscious action. If we want to change the zoning, we can do that. If we want to change the use of property, we can do that. But we shouldn't let it happen without any input and without striving our best to protect what's good in the city. So that's the main point. The other point, just some side points. I don't think it would work just to say registering would take care of the problem. It doesn't really work for us to call the police when people are are outside talking at midnight. I mean, they're not being evil. They're not doing, if my neighbor on the other side has friends over and is talking outside at midnight, it happens once or twice in the summer, and I'm not going to call the police. But if you have a rental property where they're doing it every night for a week or every weekend, it's a totally different question. But it's not really, I think our police have better things to do than to come and say, it's time to put out your campfire, go inside. And it's, same thing for having car alarm beeps, They forget that they have their car out there, or they remember that it's out there at 1 a.m. So they're out there clicking their beepers, to lock their cars. Nobody else does that. We live there. We have our cars in the garage. It's just, there's all these little things. People were out there collecting clams in the cove. I don't know what they were doing. It looked like they were going to eat them, And there were people fishing there nonstop, and you're wondering, do they have a fishing license? These are areas that aren't really going to survive if you have intensive use, and that's what's happening. So I think we have to look at this as a business that this person is running. He's running it in an area that is meant for people to live in. So that's what I would ask, is a reframing of the question, in the sense that this is not a use that's allowed in that area. Thank you.
That's one quick question.
Yeah.
Facing the house in question, are you on the right or the left?
I'm on the left.
Thank you. This gentleman was up first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Dick Castrucci. I live on Leewood Drive, which is off of Old North Main, very close to the property that we are talking about. I read an article in a paper on the 1st of August that talked about the issues that we're having here. And the very next day, in the Sun, I read an article. It was almost exactly the same article. Now, talking about Lake Placid, New York, they have had this problem, and they have recently taken action with their city council to address the issues. And I'd like to tell you what is in the legislation that is going to be voted on in November. First of all, for all Airbnb properties, they now have a registration fee which is now required. And this is written into a zoning bill. And the occupancy is taxed at 4%, which goes to the city for handling their tourist problems. They also have required that there is an on-site person responsible that must live within the city limits that is required to respond within a reasonable time. That's in the law. The law is based, Mr. Genie, on the number of bedrooms. It isn't on the number of beds. And what they have put into their system is that they allow 4 people per bathroom. So if you have a 3-bedroom home and two bathrooms, you are allowed 8 people in that property. There are strict parking requirements that they are going to enforce. They do not allow campers or boats to be parked on the properties. They have a complaint process that is in place, and they have a 3 strikes and you're out. If there is a complaint, if there are 3 complaints issued against your property, your registration will be pulled, and you can no longer be a rental property, short-term rental. They have regulated the Airbnb properties as a business, which means that they are being treated just like hotels and motels. And the code enforcement officer will then go into the properties to make sure that there are adequate fire and safety issues on all of the properties. And it's a safety issue for the police and for the fire departments. So I'll keep it brief, gentlemen, but I thought you'd be interested, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for that input.
Okay, this is going to be real brief. I've lived on Old North Main Street for 50 years. Raised my family there. My
your name is?
My name is Jean Rival. My neighbor has lived there for 61 years. Now, Dick told you about Lake Placid. I'm sure you don't care about what's going on in Jackson, Wyoming. But this is what they did in short-term rental. And they took care of it pretty darn fast. And this is what I just got out of their newspaper. I have family there. That's why I know about Jackson. You spoke, the people. We listened. They took care of things. The first thing on their agenda was protecting the character of stable neighborhoods. Old North Main Street is a very stable neighborhood. Family, single, resident properties. I am very, very upset. You are allowing Airbnbs to undermine our zoning. That's got to stop. It's not right. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Mr. Gothier.
I'm Alan Gothier. I live in Morningside Drive. We're down water from where all the problems happened, by the way. We have a community association called Windmill Shores Community Association, and a year ago, we formed a committee and studied what would happen with Airbnb. And I'm sort of a very simple guy. I used to be in the car rental and leasing business. And with the state of New Hampshire, if someone rented an automobile for 180 days, they were subject to the rooms and meals tax, which I collected and sent to the state. If they rented it for 181 days, that became a long-term lease. So if we have people that are paying rooms and meals tax, they're conducting a business. We are lucky in our neighborhood that we have a deed restriction which says you cannot run a business in our neighborhood. So as soon as someone starts to run an Airbnb, they have now started to run a business, they're collecting a 9% rooms and meals tax, which if they don't pay to the state, I'm sure the state will come knock on their door. So either they're violating the rooms and meals tax ordinance and not paying rooms and meals tax, or they're violating, I assume, a zoning ordinance that would cover Old North Main Street and the area north of us where this is happening. But if you are subject to the rooms and meals tax, as far as I know, I'm a very simple person, but I believe that means you're running a business, does it not? So if you pay the rooms and meals tax, why can't we also have a little hamburger stand and pay rooms and meals tax on that too? I mean, a business is a business. If it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. They're running a business on Old North Main Street. They should be collecting the rooms and meals tax. If they're not, then they have to be, I believe, over 180 days. That I don't know. I haven't looked that up to see if it still coincides with what motor vehicle leasing and rental regulations are. But rooms and meals tax, as far as I know, makes it into a business, and that's not a business neighborhood. Thank you.
So can I follow up on that? 'Cause that's interesting. So your understanding is if you rent residential property for less than 180
I don't know, Ed, what the day restrictions are, but if you go to the Naswalk and you stay there, you pay a rooms and meals tax. If you want to lease a house in Southdown Shores for a year, you don't pay rooms and meals tax, you have a long-term lease. So somewhere in the rules and regulations, zoning, tax code, there has to be something that says this is the amount of time when you
So
stay in
what I'm thinking about is if I have a house in your neighborhood, I guess it wouldn't be permitted on Morningside Drive, but in some other neighborhood, in my neighborhood.
Correct.
If I rented out a room or an apartment and it were permissible under zoning, am I conducting a business?
I would say if it's for a short term, that you must, if you have a room that somebody comes in, let's say they're going to the boat school, at some point in time, you've got a short-term visitation, which, does that make you eligible for rooms and meals tax? Or do you rent it to them for the semester, which might be 180 days, and that would make you, that you are not eligible for rooms and meals tax? I would assume that these people, if they're renting it by the week, I know there's a house in the development between the home we're talking about and Morningside Drive that's on the wall that rents for $5,200 a week, and it's been rented out for the last 3 or 4 years. They've got to be collecting rooms and meals tax on that house.
Are they running a business in your estimation?
If they're renting it by the week and collecting rooms and meals tax, that's a business. They're in the hostelry business, the same as the Naswalk.
So that shouldn't be permitted in that, that's a residential zone.
That's correct.
Permitted by zoning, is it?
Yeah, the neighbors there are not complaining that people keep a very tight control on it. I did pull in with my boat.
Therein is one of the rubs.
Yeah, my nephew lives next door, and I got off the boat, and there were like 12 people sitting there all staring at me. I went, this is odd. But he's put up with it. But I would assume, we looked at it because we thought it was the coming thing. It was the 500-pound gorilla we're all looking at. Someday I don't want to wake up and see my house is all turned blue like the hotel. And there's somebody living in it. So, as far as I know, if you're taxed as a business, you're a business. So couldn't we look into it that this is now a business that's being conducted?
But why are you a business if it's 5 months, but not a business if it's 7?
You have to ask the state of New Hampshire, why is it a long-term lease if you drive a car for 181 days, but it's a rental if you have it for 180? That was the way they wanted to collect their 9%.
Mysteries of life here, I don't, over my head, I think.
Just, that was the subject the rules and regulations I was subject to for taxation on leasing. I learned leasing versus rental when I got a letter saying, why haven't you paid your rooms and meals tax? I said, I rent cars. They're now subject to rooms and meals tax if it's under 180 days or less.
Thank you.
So I assume housing must be close to the same.
People rent their houses.
Anyone else? See, I had it in the back.
Evening, my name's Mark Roche. I live on 137 Old North Main, and we have neighbors like Paul and Sarah who are lawyers and know smart things. I'm going to go on the personal aspect. Probably one of the newer neighbors in the neighborhood. My wife and I moved to New Hampshire to live in a neighborhood. That's what we got. And we talked about the fireworks a little earlier. You know, I moved in, we lit off fireworks, and we found out one of our neighbors' dogs hated fireworks. We stopped fireworks. We help each other mow our lawns. We shovel each other's paths. The neighbor says, grab tomatoes. Now we have a business that's moved in next door. No ifs, ands, or buts. I'm in the hotel business. This company makes $93 million profit a year. It's a business. I didn't move into a business neighborhood. I would have moved into South Downs, but I wanted to live in the neighborhood. I don't think there's a compromise. You're putting a business into our neighborhood that's zoned as a residential neighborhood. In the 3.5 years I've lived in this house, my taxes have gone 51% on this property. And you're going to devalue my property now by letting business into my neighborhood and charge me a premium. That's what I like about New Hampshire. You want something, you pay tax for it. You don't want something, you don't pay a tax. I pay a premium to live in that neighborhood. You want to put a business in my neighborhood and allow it or compromise it, which I don't agree with. That's all I have to say.
What was I didn't catch the context of the $93 million.
That business makes $93 million a year profit.
What?
Airbnb.
Oh.
That's a big
I thought you
business.
meant the owners of the house.
No, yeah, if they did, I'd do it myself.
Yeah, my house would be on the market.
Thank you.
That old neighborhood.
All right, anyone else?
Hi, I'm Greg Peters. I'm Sarah Rosenwald's husband. I don't have a lot to say. I just want to reiterate what other people said. To me, this seems like a business, and we're in a residential area, so it does fall under the current zoning laws. This is a commercial enterprise. I don't see how, to me, it's obvious if you're making money, that seems like a business. So it should be a commercial enterprise. Our zoning laws already outlaw that, so I think it falls within our zoning laws already. You were talking about like a boarding house, that's already written into the residential laws. You can have a boarding house, you can have a boarder, so it already has made exceptions to those rules. If you outlawed all things, there's a problem with like you want to rent out for a month if you're going on vacation to your cousin or somebody. You could get permission from abutters. You could also, instead of having it as a, you could do a barter system where you could donate money. You know, do things like there was a ski area up in northern New Hampshire that only took donations because they couldn't run it as a business. So you could do, there are exceptions that you could have to allow people to still rent out their cabin or something. Like there are ways to work around that.
You got to have the regulatory process in place to do that.
Right. Well, first it would be outlawed, a commercial enterprise.
I'm thinking of that when the gentleman was talking about Lake Placid. I'm thinking that's a lot of bureaucracy to keep track of all that stuff and regulate it.
Yeah. But again, my main point was I think our zoning laws are already on the books that would outlaw this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this subject? No. Okay, one more.
Good evening, Andy Mercer, Andrew Mercer, 1358 Old North Main Street. I live diagonal across the street from the house to the right side. I just want to take a few minutes. I've lived in Laconia my entire life, born and raised, plan on living here for the rest of it, because I like the area. Growing up here, Old North Main Street was always a desired area, wonderful neighborhood, happy raising my family there. And this has definitely been something where we've taken it back. I have a young daughter who is up all night due to the noise complaints. Some of those things, I would consider myself and my wife great members of the community. We like to spend our money in this community. We bought a house here. We're planning on staying here. Yet, if I can't get my daughter to sleep, I don't think I can make it anymore. So I think not only does this need a quick resolution, I think we really need to look at the long-term effects of what kind of people are we bringing into this town. We want young families who want to stay here, who want to be in the town, who want to value all the resources and these neighborhoods, because eventually, people will pass on or move away or sell their homes, and we're going to be bringing in new families and new people. And I just hope that we all look at the immediate issue, but also look at the long-term effects that down the road, how are we attracting people to come here and not only live in our community, but be a part of our community. So, thank you.
Good points, thank you. Let me ask if anyone else wants to speak first, please. This gentleman wants to speak again. Anyone else for the first time before we do this? Okay, go ahead.
Sir, the population, year-round population at Lake Placid is 3,000 people. 70% of the homes that are in Lake Placid are owned by out-of-staters, and most of them are Airbnb, and that's why the issue was brought up, and they're having problems with it.
All right, another subject. Is there anyone in the audience tonight that wishes to address the council on a matter that is on tonight's agenda but a different topic? Representative St. Clair.
Of course. Hey, I raced up here to make this. I really wanted to add to that, but we've gone on and on, but I will. I'll just say that you're all right. Makes perfect sense. And I hope the city does look into this very hard. I'm here to address what's on your agenda with regards to Bike Timberfest. So I just want you to know I'm in the back of the room if you have any questions. We're just asking that the music be allowed to go to 11 p.m. And that may not happen. That'll be strictly up to the establishments on Lakeside Avenue and that blocks party there. But they want to have at least the right to go to 11 o'clock on Friday and Saturday night if there's enough people there and it's warranted. So that's it. Thank you.
All right, so this is page 37 of your packets. We're going to get to the new business. I assume that St. Clair, Representative St. Clair will stick around, so if you want to refer back to him during that discussion, he'll be available for that. Okay, so we're back to the council. What's the council's wish in terms of any direction you want to take on this for staff?
Well, if I may, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I would like to know additional information from the city's legal counsel as to why he or she is of the opinion that we are impotent to act at this point until the state offers and passes enabling legislation. I'm not convinced that's the case. It seems, I haven't done enough research on it, but I'd like some clarity in that, because I think if they come in and say it's of their legal opinion that we absolutely cannot act without enabling legislation, that limits, I think, what we might be willing to do. But if it's ambiguous, or if a little extra research indicates that we do have the ability to act, then I think that we can take the next step in saying, how should we address this situation? I certainly share the concerns of the residents that spoke tonight when they bought that property, and this is probably something that they didn't sign up for. They bought it for quality of life, the quality of the real estate, the quality of the structure, the quality of the city that we have here, and then to have the equivalent of a frat house or a bunkhouse next door. I have a great deal of empathy for them and what they're experiencing, as well as just the fiscal impact on them, because I think it diminishes the value of their property. So I think it's certainly incumbent upon us to look for a resolution in fairly short order to address this, knowing full well it may not be the perfect resolution. We may have to paint in broad strokes here and find that we have to refine this over time. But I think, I share Councilor Cheney's concerns about this as well. I think we are in a position where we should do something sooner as opposed to later. And certainly I share with Councilor Cheney the concerns that if we wait for the state to do something, we'll all be significantly older than we are right now.
So I agree with you on the enabling legislation issue in terms of skepticism. I know it wasn't your passing on word from attorneys, not necessarily your opinion, but if municipalities in the state of New Hampshire are not allowed under current law to regulate the rental housing market, and we got a lot of laws on the books in a lot of towns and cities that are not legal if we're not able to do that. Because we do it all the time. We do it here in Laconia. Regulate what you can do and you can't do in terms of rental properties. We just went through this last year at some length about what's an accessory dwelling unit and whatnot, and regulating accessory dwelling units. Well, where did we get the authority to do that? So I think I would agree with Attorney Fitzgerald that maybe we ought to have a powwow here between the people with different interpretations of what state law would allow or not allow here, and see if we can all get on the same page. That would be something we could do really quickly to see what the arguments are as to why we can't regulate, from a zoning standpoint, why we can't regulate rental properties in the city of Laconia without enabling legislation. Councilor Hamlin had his hand up.
I don't see why we can't, if we have zoning, like was brought up, and if that area is strictly residential, and they're running this particular place, excuse me, as business, and rooms and meals taxes are being collected from the state, to me that would be an exceptional thing of that business. And I don't see why we can't push the residential aspect of that. We should try it and see where it goes.
I agree. I think the issue again is going to be selectivity of enforcement. We had a perfect example talked about just a minute ago, where you've got one situation that seems to be outrageous, and another situation right down the street, almost literally, where the exact same thing is happening, but the neighbors don't complain because it's well regulated and whatever, and it's not a nuisance to them. But they're business-wise, they're doing exactly the same thing. So you outlaw it, and maybe I'm not saying we shouldn't, but if you outlaw it, you're outlawing both. You can't say we're going to do A but not B because B's a nice guy, or whatever. It's either illegal or it's not. Did you have?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to me it's an enforcement issue, and if it's not allowed in that zone, it's not allowed, period, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I hate to be simple about it.
And we don't zone by neighborhood.
It seems to me that this is
zone.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt. It seems to me like this is a reoccurring theme, but every time we talk about something, we talk about the beaches, it's enforcement. We talk about rentals, it's enforcement. I don't think the council wants to be a police department, but it seems to me that some of the stuff is just getting out of control and it needs enforcement.
Mayor, I would ask that whatever instructions we give the staff, that they include discussions with Mr. Fitzgerald and that group. I think they can add value to any effort we make to solve this problem. And as much as sometimes supporting lawyers pains me, I think he can add value here, and I would ask that the staff talk to him and others in his group as part of this process.
Anyone on council object to that?
No.
And I think we should work on it on the zoning end of that.
Yes. I don't either. I think that is
We can make that happen.
on the part of the council. Councilman.
That's the only thing we have that we can do quickly.
I mean, that's the question we need to answer right away.
Seems to
Do
me.
we have the regulatory power now, or do we not?
We can get to work on it.
All right. Thank you all for attending tonight. I know some of you have left. We'll not put this on the back burner. All right, we are on to new business. And first item of new business, item 20A, refers you to page 17 of your packet. The actual resolution is on page 31. We have several grant applications here, 3, I think, having to do with the police department. And we need to pass 3 motions tonight on each of them, so I think we can get through this very quickly. The first one has to do with resolution number 31, relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant in the amount of $13,000 and change for DWI DUI patrols, and request to schedule a public hearing. Any questions or comments on this before we get to motions? All right, first motion in order would be to move to waive the reading of resolution 31 in its entirety and read by title only. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 4 votes yes, passes unanimously. All right, next motion would be to move the first reading of resolution 31 relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $13,694.51 for DWI DUI patrols. Councilor Hamel makes that motion. Councilor Hosmer seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4-0. That motion carries on first reading. And lastly, with regard to resolution 31, we need a motion to schedule a public hearing on resolution 31 at our regular meeting on September 24th, 2018 during the city council meeting. That motion, Councilor Hosmer makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor of scheduling public hearing, please raise a hand. And 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and that takes care of resolution 31. On to resolution 32, about accepting $6,000 in change for distracted driving enforcement patrols. Any questions on this one before we get to motions? All right, that is on page 24 of your packet. And the first motion be to move to waive a reading of resolution 32 in its entirety and to read by title only. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion. Councilor Hamel seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. So we're now on to moving the approval of resolution 32 on first reading, relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $6,194.35 for distracted driving enforcement patrols. Have that motion, please. Councilor Hamel, second by Councilor Cheney. All those. Sorry, I'm ignoring this.
No, there's nobody here.
Okay, any discussion?
Just us 2.
All those in favor of approving resolution 32 on first reading, please raise a hand. 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And finally, we need to schedule a motion to schedule a public hearing on resolution 32, to be held on September 24th, 2018 during the regular city council meeting. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion, seconded by Councilor Haynes. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes affirmative, it passes unanimously. And that takes care of resolution 32, and we're on to resolution 33. And this one has to do with sustained traffic enforcement patrol. I don't know what that means. What's sustained traffic mean?
They're out there at peak times, rush hour, morning, afternoon, and just focusing on those areas.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about resolution number 33 before we get to motions? All right, so that's on page 30 of your packet. First motion be to move to waive a reading of resolution 33 in its entirety and to read by title only. Councilor Hosmer makes that motion. Councilor Cheney seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. With 4 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Next up is to move to approve Resolution 33 on first reading. Also to authorize the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $11,815.58 for sustained traffic enforcement patrol. Councilor Cheney makes that motion. Councilor Hosmer seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. 4 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries unanimously. And finally, we need to schedule a public hearing then on Resolution 33 on September 24th, 2018 during the regular city council meeting. Councilor Cheney makes that motion. Councilor Haynes seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. There are 4 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries unanimously as well. All right, then the last item under new business tonight is the aforementioned request to extend hours of operation of sound equipment and/or loudspeakers for the Bike Timber Fest event scheduled for this coming weekend in the, I don't know what 100 block that is, in the Weirs Beach block located between Tower and Foster. Thank you. My memory is slipping. So, as is mentioned in the memo there on page 37, right now the regulation says that on a Friday or Saturday evening you would be limited to 10 o'clock, and they're asking that in this case that be extended to 11 o'clock.
Move the question.
All right, you want to make the motion? All right. So we have a motion by Councilor Cheney to approve the request to extend hours of operation of sound equipment and/or loudspeakers for Bike Timber Fest from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. for the duration of this year's event. Seconded by Councilor Hosmer. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 4 votes in front of that. Unanimously. Before we get off that subject, just quickly, the subject came up during leading up to this as to what historically requests to approve changes to the loudspeaker ordinance have come to City Council, and some of them have been controversial, and that's probably the reason it has come to City Council. Typically, they have come from resorts, scheduling weddings and that sort of thing, and the wedding party doesn't want to cut off the music at 10 o'clock, that sort of thing. But we have had some controversy over the years about the issue of sleep versus fun, or whatever you want to call it, in the Weirs Beach area in particular. So the question I have before the council, just quickly, we don't have to decide this tonight, but to give some thought to, is do we want these requests to continue to come to council, or would we be happy with simply allowing them to be handled administratively? Any thoughts?
So that means he gets in trouble instead of us. I'm all in favor.
Which is exactly why I put it on the agenda for you all tonight.
Right now, he's passing the buck to us.
Yeah, so
I'll second that, Councilor Cheney, okay?
I'll agree with that too.
Yeah.
I move the question.
So I think we have a consensus that we would be happy to let the city manager handle these requests administratively.
What I probably would do, and thank you for that, and you can change that at any time, and what I probably would do is just send out a brief email saying, you know, it's a Sunday of a holiday weekend, I'm going to allow someone to have fireworks at their wedding at 10 o'clock, even though Sundays say 9 o'clock, that type of thing, so you're aware of it, and again, anytime you can revisit it.
We have no council unfinished business tonight, so we are to council comments. Council comments. Councilor Cheney, I can always count on you.
you can.
Thank you.
So this is personal in nature.
Personal.
Like most lawyers, Mr. Fitzgerald is inaccurate in his account. I've been married to that woman for 35 years, and not 38. But I wanted to take a moment to thank her publicly. She has suffered through my vocation and my avocations and my hobbies and my misadventures, and has always been with me on my anniversary. So I asked her to come tonight. the scratch marks in the door at home are not indicative of her objection. I want to say I love her, and I know that's not normal for this body, but, and I want to thank her publicly for 35 of the greatest years.
One or the other.
I don't know, she told me 37.
I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that the morning of every one of the last 35 years, I've heard her quietly recount the words of Socrates before he took the hemlock poison. And she said, "Patient my soul, thou has endured still worse than this." I'm hoping we endure it for a number more years. I love you, baby. Thanks.
I thought you were going to tell us that you were on a series of one-year contracts. Renewable annually.
Nope.
At her option.
Well,
Aren't we all?
yeah.
I'll speak for myself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that.
Yes, congratulations to you and our sympathy. Councilor Hamel.
Yeah, just a quick note, they had the Multicultural Day Saturday, right? Yeah, today's Monday. So that seemed to be a very big success. Thank you for all the organizers of it. And,
Absolutely.
everybody came down, looks like they had a good time, the weather was great.
Another volunteer
A lot of
army.
good food, and it was very nice.
Anyone else? Councilor Haynes.
Just briefly, just like to thank the people that organized the dog park situation. I didn't realize that opening a dog park would bring so many people, and thanks to the councilors that came. It's very nice, and they've done a good job. So, one of the, I don't know how many more things that we can put on Kevin Dunleavy's plate, but he seems to always show up and does a great job. And would you pass that on, Scott?
Absolutely.
Amen to that. No, absolutely. No, it was a fun event, and it was kind of hard for me to envision exactly what it was going to look like before I was there. I guess I didn't really have a clear image in my head of what the dog park looks like, but it's a nice setting.
It is.
And I think they did a really nice job of it, so we're all very, very pleased with that. Okay, any other council comments? No big grand announcements to make. It's 9:10. So if there's no other business before the council tonight, I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned at 9:10 p.m. Thank you. You got a big date now?
Well, I'm hoping
Well, guess you'll be
something's
heading out.
still open, that I can at least buy her.
Well, leave next week. Yeah, leave next week.
Probably won't see you, so you have a great time.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Stay safe there.
Yeah, you know,
Enjoy.
The new
my, going with my mother-in-law.
If you've got to go, you gotta go.
Enjoy.
I don't ever, you know, sort of.
So you're going to work with
Yep.
Fancy on the details and the hot dogs. So we'll get them all here. They were all marked this Friday, Saturday.
I too left at 6:30.
Still hard. I've heard a lot.
Oh, yeah.